looking at gender differences in achievement motivation. What I'm going to do, is trip over this, is I'm going to talk about 3 lines of research that, when taken together, reveal some very powerful messages that we tend to give men and women, that tend to channel males, boys and men, towards success, and females away from success and achievement. First of all, I want for you to imagine that a child runs in and says to you, "I'm so excited, I just made an A on a math test." And then the parent says, "That's great, you're so smart." Or the parent says, "That's great, you really deserve it, you worked hard for that A." Now, on the surface, those comments, that you're smart or that you worked hard, I wonder if there would be another marker somewhere, do you know?
I can grab one.
Thank you. That you're smart or that you worked hard look like they're the same. I mean, that they're both compliments, and they are. They're both compliments. They're both congratulatory. They both express, there he is. Just like about. We're waiting for our marker, and of course for you.
For me, yeah, I know. We're waiting for me.
Yeah. Both of these comments express appreciation, congratulations. They both express the pride that you have in the child. But what researchers tell us is that there's something significant about these compliments that makes a world of difference in what you communicate to the child. Telling someone that they're smart is referred to as a stable attribution. It's called a stable attribution because you are attributing that person's success to something that is within the essence of who they are. Something that's very stable. It's a part of who they are. And therefore, since it is a part of who they are, it's likely to be repeated. If you're smart today, you're likely going to be smart tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, next decade, whatever. Telling someone that they have worked hard, however, is referred to as an unstable attribution, meaning that if you tell somebody they've worked hard, they deserve the A, they've worked hard, you are attributing their success to something that is not so much who they are, but what they've done. And as good as that might be, it's still unstable because you don't have the same confidence that just because you worked hard today and succeeded, that if you try another hard test in a month from now, you might not have the energy, the time, the desire to work as hard next time, so you may or may not succeed. So stable attributions or unstable attributions communicate whether or not the success is going to continue or whether or not it's not likely to continue. And thank you. And what's significant for research with gender is that they found that stable attributions are more often given to sons for something like a math test, a science test, something that is traditionally thought of as a male characteristic. Now, I always have to clarify with my students that doing math well, doing science well, being able to work on a motor that's broken is not a male thing. It's just that our society attributes that to males. But so when I say it's a male characteristic, it's not really a male characteristic. It's just that we associate it with that. They tell us that people are more likely to attribute stable characteristics when their son succeeds in something like math or science, and are more likely to attribute their daughter's success to something that's rather unstable. That he did well in math because he's really smart in math. He's always been gifted, always been talented, he's got a lot of ability. But that she made A's in math too, and she worked so hard. Didn't come as naturally for her. So what they say is that this is more likely to communicate that with males, success is more likely to be repeated. But that with females, success is more tenuous, more chancy, more iffy. We're not really sure so much that will lead to success in the future. In a related piece of research, college students were asked, in terms of feeling good about yourself and what you do, which is more important to you? I'm trying to think of the word exactly. Reflected appraisals. A reflected appraisal would be when someone gives you feedback about how well you've done, okay? Or social comparison, which is when you see how well you've done compared to someone else. Or self-perceived competence, which is when you look at what you've done and you decide, well, did I get as much done today as I should have? How many things did I cross off on the list? How do I have them do? And what they found is they asked these college students, which is more important to you in terms of feeling good about yourself? They found that males and females equally were likely to say that self-perceived competence was important, which is good, okay? What they found was that females, however, were more likely to say that they base how they think they're doing on what others tell them about what they're doing. And that males were more likely to base how they thought they were doing on whether or not they were doing better than someone else, okay? In something related here, they kind of did a follow-up. Afterwards, they asked the males and females if they would state out loud how well they expected that they did on this particular assignment. And they said that the males readily did so. They said out loud that they thought they did well, whatever. They said females were hesitant, and when asked why, the females said that they were afraid if they said out loud that they thought they really did well on whatever the task was, that it would make them look like they were bragging and would hurt other people that maybe didn't do as well. They asked the males if they had any of the same qualms, and they said no, that they didn't know how their success would make somebody else feel bad. In fact, they said that they thought that maybe knowing that they had done real well would be impressive to the women in the group, okay? So what we find here is that females tend to be more likely to base their perception of how they're doing on others' opinions, and that if they do really well, that their success is likely to hurt other people. Males, however, base how well they think they're doing on being better than someone else, and they believe that their success is not going to hurt people. Why should it? It would impress other people. Okay? Now, this is relevant given a third line of research that has been done on the term fear of success. Fear of success is defined as knowing that you could potentially succeed big time, but that if you do, there will be negative consequences. Understand that if you have a fear of success, you typically are not wanting to fail, and you're not trying to fail. You're just holding back a little bit because you know that if you do as well as you could, something bad could happen, okay? In terms of fear of success, there was a projective test that was given to men and women where they asked the men and women, they gave them this sentence and asked them to complete the story. Let's see, let me do this right. They were given this sentence: blank is at the top of class in medical school. And for the women, they put in the word and for the men, they put in the word John. So for the men, they were asked, John is at the top of his class in medical school, complete the story. And they said that the men were more likely to complete the story with very positive outcomes. Like, for instance, John is at the top of his class in medical school, and he is well respected by people in the community. He makes a lot of money. He can provide well for his family. People look up to him. Women were given the statement, Anna's at the top of her class in medical school, and they said that 65% of the women, roughly 2 out of 3, were more likely to end that with negative outcomes. For instance, Anna's at the top of her class in medical school and now feels alienated from her friends because they don't have much in common. Or Anna's at the top of her class in medical school but is thinking of dropping out because she really wants a family. Okay? So, evidently, from that one study, it looks like men are thinking of a male success as being a win-win. He succeeds and everybody benefits. Whereas for females, if she succeeds as much as she could, there's going to be some consequences to pay. Now, along with this, another study looked at middle school students, and they specifically, I'm going to do this over here, they specifically looked at students' grades in math and science, and, that's a horrible graph, and social image. They followed these kids from 6th grade to 8th, and when they tested these kids between 6th and 7th grade, they found that boys and girls were no different. That for boys and girls both, their social image was better when their grades in math and science were better. So you, for the most part, have kids who have high grades in math and science, and their social image was pretty good. But you had kids who, boys or girls, who didn't do well in math and science, and their social image typically was not as good. But an interesting thing happened when they tested again between 7th and 8th grade. For the boys, this trend continued, where they continued to feel good about themselves to the extent that they had high grades in math and science. But for females, they saw this, that the girl's self-image was best when her grades went from an A to a B. Then for the girls who continue making A's, their self-image wasn't quite as good as for those who made B's. Now again, they weren't failing. Okay? They just weren't succeeding as much as they could. And researchers refer to this as the smart versus social dilemma. That seems to appear during puberty in females, where they feel like they're not going to be quite as popular, not going to be liked quite as much, not going to have quite as good of a social life if they're really as smart and as good as they could be. Okay? Now, you'll be glad to know that this trend continues in college. They tell us that females and males are equally likely to enter college with a major in math. Females are actually slightly more likely to enter college with a major in life science, like biology. But by the time they graduate, females are more likely to switch to a major that is typically considered more feminine, like elementary education. Females and males are, in medical school, females and males are equally likely to enter with an idea of specializing in internal medicine or surgery, but by the time they graduate, females are more likely to switch out of those specialties and go into something that, again, is typically considered more feminine, like obstetrics, gynecology, pediatrics, or so on. When women were asked why, they said that there was such a high interpersonal cost to going into surgery or internal medicine that they felt like it would be more acceptable. So for each of these educational levels, middle schoolers, college, and even medical school, what they are finding is that males are gearing up towards success, that they are preparing themselves to succeed, evidently without obstacles, without seeing obstacles, whereas women are toning down their success somewhat, not failing, but toning it down because they believe to succeed is going to have some social consequences. So, for females, negative consequences, and for males, that it's not. It's a win-win.
So negative for self or others?
Both.
Or both?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When you say social consequences, does that mean like friendships or?
Yeah, it could be anything. It could be friendships. It could be I won't be able to find a husband who's okay with me making bukus of money more than he does. I'm not going to have time to have kids. I'm not going to have a social life. I'm not going to, and my kids won't have my time. So it could be for yourself. It could be for them.
Could it be like people aren't going to think of me as being feminine?
Yeah, that too. Yeah, it could be any of that. Yeah. So what we find is research shows that for males, they're given the message that their success is more likely to be repeated, that they tend to gauge their success by being better than other people, and that they think that's going to impress people, and that when they do succeed, it's win-win, that there isn't a whole lot that's going to be said about it negatively. For females, that success is somewhat tenuous, that others' opinions count, and that those other people's opinions are going to display hurt, and that there are negative consequences to doing really, really well. So, I want to make a point of saying that none of this, I strongly believe, that none of this is intentional. You get parents and you sit them down and say, hey, look, how much are you trying to keep your daughters back? I guarantee you, any responsible parent is going to say, well, of course I'm not trying to keep my daughter back. Research shows that if you ask parents, do you treat your sons and daughters the same, they almost always say yes. But research also shows if you don't ask them, you just watch how they talk to them and interact, there's a difference. Okay? So this is not an intentional thing. This is not on parents' minds. I often tell my students that parents seldom get together and say, honey, let's have a child and see if we can't ruin his or her little life. You know, that just doesn't happen. This is all something that happens really outside of our awareness to a great extent. And so some people would think, well, if we're not aware of it, it's not going to be a big deal, but it is. Sometimes the things that we are least aware of are the most damaging, because if this happened in a blatant way, we would catch ourselves and we would cut it out, okay? Most people would. But when you don't know you're doing it, you can't monitor it, you can't keep it in check, it's just going on. And then, when your son succeeds in a really big way, and your daughter holds back some, you might be likely to attribute it to just, well, that's nature's way. You know, men are just more go-getters than women are. It might not be nature at all. It could be 20 or 30 years of being given messages that if you succeed, I don't know, hold back a little. So, what can we do about this?
What can we do about it?
Well, several things, I believe. One is to be more intentional about the messages that we give, and not just kids, but adults too. Keep in mind that some of this research was with adults, college students, and beyond. So this isn't just something that affects kids. It certainly does affect them. That's where it starts. But it's also for adults as well. Be very careful. Stop and think before you tell somebody why you think they did so well. And base it on the situation, not the gender. Sometimes when someone does well, it really is because they're talented and smart. And sometimes, frankly, they're not. It's just that they worked really hard. But base what you say on what actually happened, not the gender of the person. And sometimes just pausing for a second and thinking about it helps. I think another thing is that for good or not, females do appear to be more influenced by others' opinions than males do. And this isn't the only study that has shown that. There are other studies in other areas like religion and sexual behavior and a variety of other things where research has shown that females are more likely to pay attention to and be persuaded by somebody else's opinion. Now, again, keep in mind that does not mean that if you're female, you have an inborn thing. I think what it means probably ties into what we talked about last week, about that unmitigated communion, where you're really interested in how you can be cooperative and be one of the bunch. In any society, a group of people, if they are in the minority in terms of power, they typically are more interested in what do other people think I should do. And the group that's in power is more likely to not even notice so much. And it's not, again, not conscious, it's just something we do. So, for good or bad, women tend to be more interested in knowing what other people think, and a lot of what they feel about themselves will hinge on that. So I think we need to take seriously how directly we speak to women and girls about their talents and abilities and hard work and potential. To say to them, if you know a female who's very, very talented, tell her that. She might be waiting for somebody to say that. Let her know if she's graduate school material. Let her know if you admire a talent that she has or an ability. Whatever, it's very important. Something that I do along these lines, when a student, and this is true for males or females, although I do it knowing that it might matter more to the females, if a student does particularly well in an exam, I make a comment about how well they've done. Or especially if they have been doing poorly, but now they're really starting to get it, I make a comment about that I've noticed the improvement. And that is because if others' opinions matter, then they're going to be more likely to give themselves credit. But also, knowing that sometimes people, especially males, are looking at how did I do in comparison to others. When I distribute the exams back and they see what they did, I put on the board, how many people made A's and B's and C's and D's. Because it matters to some people, typically males more than females. How did I do compared to other people? And if you see a B on there and you're used to an A, but then you see that, wow, nobody made an A, so I'm probably doing okay. And I think we've all done that at some point, but research shows that that is a little bit more important for males. And then finally, I think that it's real easy to say, and sometimes my students will say, well, women are just too worried about things that shouldn't matter, they should just not worry about it. Well, that's really easy to say, but if you're a female and you honestly believe that if you succeed, you might not have the husband or the children or the friends that you want, that's really powerful. I mean, I love what I do. I love what I do. But if I really honestly deep down thought that having that would keep me from having a husband and kids, I wouldn't do what I do. I mean, if it came down to that. But thankfully, I don't believe I have to make that choice, and so I don't. But there's a world of women out there who know from what they've seen in the world so far that they are going to be the person typically who's going to shop for groceries, shop for clothes. They're going to come home, they're going to cook the dinner, they're going to clean up. They're going to be responsible for cleaning the house, raising the kids, taking off work if somebody's sick, taking off work several years because they're young kids. When they get into school, they're going to be the one who's going to drive the kid to school, pick them up, take them to the doctor's appointments, soccer practice, the piano lessons, and on it goes. If you knew that that was going to be your life, would you want to be a surgeon? I think I wouldn't. If I really thought that I was going to do that, I would probably work really hard to not work outside the home. Or if I did work, I'd have a job that didn't have a high status, because with that status comes a lot of responsibility, a lot of overtime, and a lot of working when nobody else is noticing. So I think that none of this is going to change until we somehow teach boys that when you get older, you too are going to have to change diapers, grocery shop. You're also going to have to wash dishes. Sometimes you'll have to take off work because the kid is sick. And sometimes you might be the one to go part-time because of the needs of the family. Not all the time, but sometimes you're going to have to cook a meal and do the dishes. And sometimes your wife is going to work late. And you know what? You don't necessarily get extra applause for that because she does that, the other days. And I think until we communicate that to boys and girls and they grow up thinking that, I think we're going to continue to see this. But thankfully that is happening. There are more and more little boys who are doing that, who are being taught to do that. And until we tell women that just because it's expected that you do 99% of the housework after you've done 50% of the employed work, just because it's expected doesn't mean it's something you have to accept. You can sit down and talk to your spouse and say, look, this is what we're both doing. It's not fair. I'm not asking you to do all of it, but 50% is reasonable. And until we teach women, little girls, that that's okay, I don't know that we're going to see much change here. But the good thing is that as women are more and more, not just in the workforce, but having careers, we are seeing some of this change. Not as fast as we want it to, but it is changing some. I'm going to take a break and take a breath and a sip of water, and I would love your comments.